There's a moment that probably lives somewhere in your memory right now. A conversation you had today or yesterday or maybe last week, and the conversation itself, it's over. It ended. The person walked away, or you walked away, or you both said goodbye and went on with your day. But something strange happened after that. The conversation didn't leave. It stayed. And hours later, maybe while you were driving or standing in the shower or lying in bed waiting for sleep, you found yourself back inside that conversation. Not the real conversation, a version of it, replaying the words, rewinding moments, asking yourself quiet questions you didn't ask out loud. Did I say the wrong thing? Did I sound awkward? Did they notice? And maybe you've done this so many times in your life that you don't even realize it's unusual. Maybe you think everyone does this. But here's the truth, not everyone does. And the people who do, people who overthink every conversation, aren't doing it because of the conversation itself. They're doing it because of something much deeper. And if you're someone who replays conversations long after they end, you already know what this feels like. That quiet spiral, that internal rewinding, that strange inability to let the moment rest. You might have told yourself it's just who you are. You might have called yourself anxious or sensitive or too much in your own head. And maybe people have told you to just let it go, to stop thinking so much, to relax. But here's what they don't understand. Overthinking conversations isn't a choice. It's not something you decide to do. It's something that happens to you. It's a process your mind begins without asking permission. And if you really want to understand it, you have to stop thinking of it as overthinking at all. You have to start thinking of it as something else entirely. Something much more human. Something tied to the way you experience safety, connection, and your own sense of worth in the world. Because what looks like overthinking on the surface is actually emotional archaeology underneath. You're not just replaying words, you're digging through layers, searching for meaning, searching for clues, searching for proof of something your mind needs to know. And that need, that quiet desperation to understand what just happened, reveals more about you than it does about the conversation itself. The thing most people don't realize is this. When you replay a conversation in your mind, you're not actually remembering it. You're reconstructing it. Your brain doesn't store conversations the way a recording device does. It doesn't save every word, every tone, every facial expression exactly as it happened. Instead, your brain takes fragments, pieces, impressions, feelings, and then it rebuilds the conversation later using those pieces. And here's where it gets interesting. The rebuilding process isn't neutral. It's not objective. Your brain doesn't reconstruct the conversation based on what was said. It reconstructs it based on how you felt during the conversation and how you feel about yourself in general. If you walked away feeling uncertain, your brain highlights the uncertain moments. If you felt anxious, your brain pulls forward the moments that justify that anxiety. If you felt like you said something wrong, your brain searches the memory for evidence that you did. And suddenly the conversation you're replaying isn't the conversation that actually happened. It's a version filtered through your emotions, your fears, your internal beliefs about yourself. And that version feels so real that you believe it completely. This is why two people can have the same conversation and walk away with completely different experiences of it. One person remembers it as easy, light, natural. The other person remembers it as awkward, heavy, full of mistakes. Same conversation, different internal filters, and if you're someone who overthinks conversations, Your filter is set to a very specific setting. It's set to search for problems, to scan for threats, to find proof that something went wrong, even when nothing did. And this isn't your fault. This isn't a flaw in your thinking. It's a feature of your nervous system. It's the way your brain learned to keep you safe. Because somewhere along the way, probably long ago, your mind decided that analysing conversations was necessary. That replaying moments was protective. That if you could just figure out what went wrong, you could fix it. You could prevent rejection. You could stay safe. You could belong. And here's the part people rarely talk about. There's difference between reflection and rumination. Reflection is when you think about a conversation, notice something interesting, maybe learn from it, and then move on. Reflection has a beginning and an end. It's purposeful. It leads somewhere. But rumination is different. Rumination is when you think about a conversation, and then think about it again, and then think about it again, and you can't stop. You loop, you circle, you get stuck, and the thinking doesn't lead anywhere. It doesn't solve anything. It doesn't bring clarity. It just keeps you trapped in the same questions, the same worries, the same mental replay. And people who overthink conversations aren't reflecting. They're ruminating. And rumination isn't about the conversation. It's about the emotional need underneath. The need for certainty. The need for control. The need to know you're okay. The need to know you're accepted. The need to know you didn't ruin something. The need to know you're still safe. This is why you can't just stop overthinking by telling yourself to stop. Because the overthinking isn't the problem. It's the symptom. The real problem is the question your mind is trying to answer. And that question is almost never about the conversation itself, it's about you. Am I acceptable? Am I likable? Am I too much? Am I enough? Did I mess this up? Did I say something that made them think less of me? Will they still want to talk to me? Am I safe here? These are the questions driving the mental replay, and until those questions feel answered, your mind will keep searching. It will keep scanning the conversation for clues. It will keep reconstructing moments, analysing tone, replaying words, looking for evidence one way or the other. And the exhausting part is this. The evidence you find is almost always shaped by what you're afraid of. If you're afraid of rejection, you find evidence of rejection. If you're afraid of being too much, you find evidence that you talked too much. If you're afraid of being boring, you find evidence that the other person seemed bored. Your fear becomes the lens, and the lens shapes what you see. And here's something else. Not everyone overthinks conversations. Some people finish talking and genuinely let it go. They don't replay the words. They don't analyse the tone. They don't lie awake wondering if they said something wrong. And if you're someone who does overthink, you've probably noticed this difference. You've probably watched people move through social situations with ease, with lightness, with a kind of freedom you don't feel. And maybe you've wondered what that's like, to just talk and then stop thinking about it, to trust that the conversation was fine, to believe that if something was wrong, the other person would say so, to not carry the weight of every word you spoke for hours or days afterward. And the truth is, people who don't overthink conversations have a different relationship with themselves. They're not more confident necessarily. They're not more skilled socially. They simply have less fear attached to the outcome of conversations. They don't feel like their worth is on the line every time they speak. They don't scan for threats because they don't feel fundamentally threatened. They trust themselves. They trust that they're okay, even if a conversation doesn't go perfectly. And that trust, that quiet inner security, is what allows them to let conversations go. But if you're someone who overthinks, that trust isn't there, or it's fragile, or it's buried underneath years of evidence that conversations are risky, that words can hurt, that connection is unpredictable, that people can turn on you or leave or judge you or misunderstand you. And so your mind stays alert. It stays vigilant. It keeps reviewing the footage, so to speak, looking for signs of danger, looking for moments where you might have slipped, where you might have revealed too much or not enough, where you might have lost someone's approval or interest or respect. And this vigilance is exhausting. It's heavy. It takes up space in your mind that could be used for rest, for presence, for ease. But your mind doesn't care about ease. It cares about safety. And for your mind, overthinking feels safer than not thinking at all. Because if you're analysing the conversation, at least you're doing something, at least you're trying to protect yourself. At least you're not just blindly moving forward without checking for danger. And maybe the hardest part is this. Overthinking conversations makes you feel like you're solving a problem. It feels productive. It feels like if you just think hard enough, long enough, carefully enough, you'll figure out what went wrong, or what could go wrong, or how to prevent things from going wrong in the future. It feels like preparation, like protection, like care. But the truth is, overthinking doesn't solve anything. It doesn't change what happened. It doesn't predict what will happen. It doesn't make you safer. It just keeps you stuck in a loop, replaying the same moments, asking the same questions, searching for an answer that never comes. Because the answer you're looking for isn't in the conversation. It's in your relationship with yourself. And until that shifts, until something inside you feels more secure, more trusting, more at ease, the overthinking will continue. Not because you want it to, but because your mind believes it has to. And here's the thing people who overthink conversations need to hear. You're not broken. You're not damaged. You're not too sensitive or too anxious or too much in your head. You're someone whose nervous system learned to be careful. You're someone whose mind learned that words matter, that tone matters, that connection is fragile and must be protected. You're someone who cares deeply about how you show up in the world, about how you affect others, about whether you belong. And that care, that sensitivity, that awareness, those are beautiful qualities. They're not flaws, but they come with a cost. And the cost is this constant mental reviewing, this inability to rest, this feeling that every conversation carries weight. And maybe what you need isn't to stop overthinking. Maybe what you need is to understand why you overthink. To see the patterns, to recognize the fears, to notice the questions your mind is really asking. Because once you see it clearly, once you understand what's driving the replay, something begins to shift. Not immediately, not dramatically, but slowly, gently, quietly. You start to notice when you're overthinking. You start to see the loop for what it is. And that awareness, small as it seems, is the beginning of something new. It's the beginning of a different relationship with your own mind. A relationship built on understanding instead of frustration. On compassion instead of criticism. On curiosity instead of judgment. And that changes everything. Imagine this. You just finished a conversation. Maybe it was at work, maybe with a friend, maybe with someone you just met. The conversation itself lasted 10 minutes, maybe 20. It felt normal enough while it was happening. You talked, they talked, You both smiled at the right moments, you said goodbye, and then you walked away. And for the first few seconds, maybe even the first few minutes, you're fine. You're thinking about other things. What you need to do next, where you're going, what you're hungry for. Your mind is moving forward, moving on. But then something shifts, something small, a flicker, a tiny pull in your chest, and suddenly you're back in the conversation. Not physically, but mentally, completely. It starts so quietly you almost don't notice it. A single thought, just one. Did I talk too much? And that thought, small as it is, gentle as it seems, opens a door. And once that door opens, more thoughts begin walking through. Did they seem interested? Did I interrupt them? Did I sound nervous? Was my voice too loud? Too quiet? Did I laugh at the wrong time? And suddenly you're not walking forward anymore. You're walking backward, rewinding, replaying, scanning the conversation for clues, for signs, for evidence of something you can't quite name but desperately need to know. And here's what's strange. The conversation you're replaying isn't the one that actually happened. It's a version of it, a reconstruction. Your mind takes the pieces it remembers, the fragments, the impressions, and it starts filling in gaps. It adds tone where tone might have existed. It adds expressions you think you saw. It highlights moments that felt off, even if they weren't. And the more you replay it, the more vivid this reconstructed version becomes, until it feels more real than the original, until you can't tell the difference between what actually happened and what you think happened. And this version, this reconstructed memory, it's coloured by how you felt. If you walked away feeling uncertain, the replay is uncertain. If you walked away feeling anxious, the replay is anxious. If you walked away feeling like you made a mistake, the replay will show you exactly where that mistake might have been. Imagine you're sitting in your car now, or lying in bed, or standing in the kitchen making tea, and the conversation is playing in your mind like a film. But you're not just watching it, you're inside it. You're feeling it again. The slight tightness in your chest when you said that one thing. The pause that felt too long. The moment when they looked away. And your mind starts analysing. It starts breaking the conversation into smaller and smaller pieces. That sentence you said, the way you phrased it, the word choice. Did you sound pretentious? Did you sound unsure? Did you sound like you were trying too hard? And then their response, the exact words they used, the tone. Was it warm? Was it flat? Did they seem engaged, or were they just being polite? And that laugh, was it real? Or was it one of those polite laughs people do when they don't know what else to say? And here's what happens next. Your mind starts searching for patterns. It starts connecting dots, pulling evidence. You remember they checked their phone once during the conversation, just once. But now that moment feels significant. It feels like proof. Proof that they were bored. Proof that they wanted to leave. Proof that you weren't interesting enough to hold their attention. Maybe they said they had to go. They said it casually. They said it kindly. But now you're replaying the way they said it. The tone. The speed. Did they seem relieved? Did they seem like they were escaping? And suddenly this normal, polite ending to a conversation becomes evidence of something darker. Evidence that you failed somehow, that you weren't enough, that they didn't enjoy talking to you as much as you thought they did. And your body starts responding, not dramatically, but subtly. There's a tightness somewhere, maybe in your chest, maybe in your throat, maybe in your stomach. A small knot forming. Your breathing might get a little shallower, not enough to notice consciously, but enough that your body feels slightly on edge, slightly alert, and your mind interprets this physical sensation as more evidence. You feel bad. Therefore, something bad must have happened. The feeling becomes proof, the anxiety becomes validation, and the loop tightens, and time starts doing something strange. The actual conversation lasted 20 minutes, but the mental replay has been going for an hour, 2 hours, and you haven't even noticed. Because when you're inside your head like this, time disappears, or it stretches, or it moves in ways that don't make sense. Minutes feel like seconds, hours feel like minutes. And the strangest part is that the replay isn't even consistent. You're not rewatching the same version over and over, you're editing it. Each time you replay a moment, it changes slightly. A word shifts, a tone darkens, an expression becomes more ambiguous, and each version feels true. Each version feels like it could have been what really happened. And this uncertainty, this inability to pin down exactly what occurred, makes the overthinking worse. Because if you can't trust your memory, if you can't know for sure what happened, how can you ever feel safe? Imagine the specific thoughts now, the ones that cycle through. Did I dominate the conversation? Did I not talk enough? Did I seem too eager, too distant? Did I make good eye contact? Too much eye contact? Did I smile at the right times? Did I come across as genuine or fake? Did they think I was interesting? Did they think I was trying too hard to be interesting? Did I ask enough questions about them? Did I talk too much about myself? And each question branches into more questions. If I talk too much about myself, what does that say about me? Does it mean I'm self-centered? Does it mean I'm insecure? Does it mean I don't know how to have a balanced conversation? And if they think I'm self-centered, will they want to talk to me again? Will they tell other people? Will this affect how others see me? And here's where the mind does something particularly exhausting. It starts catastrophizing. It takes a small moment, a tiny uncertainty, and it stretches it into the future. It creates scenarios, predictions. You imagine the next time you see this person, you imagine them being distant, cold, polite but not warm. You imagine them avoiding you. You imagine them talking to others about how awkward you were, how you talked too much, how you didn't listen, how you seemed off. And these imagined futures feel real. They feel inevitable. Because your mind, when it's anxious, doesn't distinguish well between what happened, what might happen, and what you fear will happen. It treats all three as equally true, and maybe you try to stop. Maybe you tell yourself, just let it go. It was fine. You're overthinking. But telling yourself to stop thinking about something is like telling yourself not to think about a white elephant. The moment you try to push the thoughts away, they push back harder. They become more insistent, more urgent, because your mind isn't replaying this conversation for fun. It's replaying it because it believes there's something important here, something that needs to be resolved, some question that needs an answer, some threat that needs to be assessed. And until your mind feels satisfied, until it feels like it's extracted every possible piece of information from this conversation, it won't let go. And here's something people who don't overthink rarely understand. This process is exhausting. It's mentally draining. It takes energy to replay conversations. It takes energy to analyze every word, every pause, every micro-expression. It takes energy to hold multiple versions of the same conversation in your mind simultaneously. It takes energy to catastrophize. It takes energy to manage the anxiety that comes with all of this. And by the time you finally stop replaying the conversation, if you stop, you feel tired. Not physically tired necessarily, but mentally, emotionally tired. Like you've been working for hours even though all you did was think. Imagine it's 3 a.m. now, you're lying in bed, you were tired hours ago. But the moment you lay down, the conversation came back, and now you're wide awake. Your body is tired, but your mind is racing, and the conversation that happened 8 hours ago feels more present than the pillow under your head. You're replaying moments with such detail, such intensity, that you can almost hear their voice again, almost see their face. And you're asking yourself the same questions you've been asking all night. But now, at 3 a.m, everything feels heavier, every uncertainty feels bigger, every small mistake feels catastrophic. Because nighttime does something to anxious thoughts. It amplifies them. It removes the distractions of the day. It leaves you alone with your mind. And your mind, without anything else to focus on, focuses completely on the thing it's been circling all evening. And you start doing something that feels almost compulsive. You start mentally rehearsing. You imagine the next conversation with this person. You plan what you'll say, how you'll say it. You imagine ways to fix whatever you think went wrong. You imagine being more careful, more measured, more perfect. You create scripts, full conversations that haven't happened yet. And you run through these imagined conversations over and over, trying to find the perfect version. The version where you don't make mistakes, where you don't feel anxious, where they see you the way you want to be seen. And this mental rehearsing feels productive. It feels like preparation. But really it's just another form of the same loop. Another way your mind tries to control something it can't control. Another way it tries to create certainty in an uncertain world. And maybe at some point in the night, you reach for your phone. You scroll through old messages with this person. You reread what they wrote. You analyze their word choice, their punctuation, their emoji use, looking for clues, looking for reassurance, looking for proof that they still like you, that the conversation didn't ruin anything, that you're still okay in their eyes, and if they haven't messaged you recently, that feels significant too. It feels like more evidence. Evidence that they're pulling away, that they're done with you, that the conversation was the final straw, and the overthinking intensifies, because now you're not just replaying one conversation, you're replaying the entire relationship, every interaction, every text, every moment, searching for the pattern, searching for the moment when things started to shift, searching for proof that you were always too much or never enough. And here's the cruelest part of all this. While you're lying there overthinking, the other person, the one you had the conversation with, they're probably asleep. They're probably not thinking about the conversation at all. They had the conversation, they moved on, they went about their day, and now they're resting. Because for them, the conversation was just a conversation. It didn't carry weight. It didn't trigger analysis. It didn't open wounds. It was just a normal interaction in a normal day. And intellectually, you know this. You know they're probably not lying awake analysing your words the way you're analysing theirs. You know they're probably not worried about whether you liked them or thought they were interesting or noticed their flaws. But emotionally knowing this doesn't help. Because your overthinking isn't really about them. It's about you. It's about your internal world. It's about the questions you carry, the fears you hold, the beliefs you have about yourself and your place in the world. And imagine the next morning. You wake up after only a few hours of sleep. And the first thing your mind does before you even open your eyes fully is return to the conversation. It's still there, still unresolved, still demanding attention, and you feel a heaviness, not just tiredness, but a kind of emotional weight, like you're carrying something you don't know how to put down, and you go through your day with this weight. It's in the background. Sometimes you forget about it for a few minutes. You get distracted by work or a task or another conversation, but then it comes back, a thought, a flash, a reminder, and suddenly you're back in the replay, back in the analysis, back in the spiral. And what makes this particularly exhausting is that it doesn't just happen with one conversation. If you're someone who overthinks, you overthink most conversations, some more than others, but there's always something, always a moment to review, always a word to question, always a pause to interpret, always a micro expression to decode. Your mind becomes a detective, constantly gathering evidence, constantly building cases, constantly trying to solve mysteries that don't actually exist. And this becomes your normal. This becomes how you experience social interactions, not in the moment, but in the aftermath, in the endless mental review, in the exhausting analysis, in the heavy uncertainty. And maybe you've tried to explain this to people, to friends who ask why you're so quiet suddenly, to partners who wonder why you seem distant, and you try to put words to it. I'm just thinking about something. I'm just tired. I'm fine. Because how do you explain that you're trapped in a conversation that ended hours ago? How do you explain that you're still searching for evidence of whether you're acceptable, likable, enough? How do you explain that your mind won't let go until it feels certain, and certainty never comes? Most people wouldn't understand. They'd tell you to just stop thinking about it. They'd tell you it wasn't that deep. They'd tell you you're being too hard on yourself. And they'd be right. But being right doesn't make it stop, because this isn't something you choose. This is something that happens to you. This is the way your mind learned to process connection, to assess safety, to protect you from threats it believes are everywhere. And here's something you might not realize. Not all conversational overthinkers are the same. On the surface, it looks identical. Someone replays a conversation. They analyze, they worry, they search for meaning. But underneath, the reasons are different. The fears are different. The questions are different. And understanding which kind of overthinker you are or which pattern you fall into helps you understand not just what you're doing, but why you're doing it. Because the overthinking is never really about the conversation. It's about what the conversation represents, what it threatens, what it promises, what it could reveal. Some people overthink conversations because they're perfectionists, and not the kind of perfectionism that's about wanting to be the best or needing to win or seeking achievement. This is a quieter perfectionism, a more painful kind. It's the perfectionism that says if I can just get this right, if I can just say the perfect thing in the perfect way with the perfect tone, then I'll be safe. Then I'll be accepted. Then I won't be criticized or rejected or left behind. For these people, conversations feel like performances, and every performance must be flawless. So after a conversation ends, they replay it looking for mistakes. They scan for moments where they stumbled, where they paused too long, where they used the wrong word, where they laughed awkwardly, where they revealed something they wish they hadn't. And each small imperfection feels enormous, because to the perfectionist overthinker, imperfection isn't just a flaw. It's evidence that they failed. evidence that they're not good enough, evidence that the other person saw through them and found them lacking. These are the people who might spend an hour replaying a single sentence. The sentence felt wrong somehow when it came out. The phrasing was off, the tone wasn't quite right. And now, hours later, they're mentally rewriting that sentence, trying different versions, different words, different emphasis, searching for the perfect version they should have said, and they torture themselves with this. Because they know they can't go back and change it. They know the other person probably didn't even notice. They know it doesn't actually matter, but their mind can't let it go. Because the perfectionist's mind believes that perfect is possible, that perfect is necessary, that anything less than perfect is failure. And these overthinkers often have a very specific internal dialogue. They tell themselves, why did I say it like that? Why didn't I think before I spoke? Why can't I just be natural? Why does everyone else make conversation look so easy? And beneath all these questions is a deeper belief. A belief that says other people have it figured out. Other people know how to talk without making mistakes. Other people are effortlessly likable, and I'm not. I have to work at it. I have to monitor every word. I have to catch every error. Because if I don't, I'll be exposed. People will see that I don't actually know what I'm doing, that I'm not as confident or capable or put together as I try to appear. Then there are the people pleasers. And their overthinking has a different flavour entirely. They don't replay conversations looking for mistakes. They replay conversations looking for signs of disapproval, for hints that someone was unhappy, for evidence that they didn't do enough, didn't give enough, didn't say the right thing to make the other person feel good. Because for people pleasers, conversations aren't about connection. They're about managing other people's emotions, about ensuring everyone is comfortable, everyone is happy, everyone is satisfied, and their worth, their safety, their sense of okayness in the world depends on keeping others pleased. So after a conversation, they replay it, searching for moments where the other person seemed upset or disappointed or uncomfortable. And they find those moments even when they didn't exist. A slight shift in expression becomes evidence of annoyance. A shorter response becomes evidence of irritation. A yawn becomes evidence that they were boring. And the people pleaser immediately blames themselves. They immediately ask, what did I do wrong? What could I have done differently? How do I fix this? Because in their world, if someone else is unhappy, it's their fault, and it's their responsibility to repair it. These overthinkers spend hours crafting apology messages for offences they're not even sure they committed. They rehearse conversations where they explain themselves, justify themselves, smooth things over. They imagine ways to make the other person feel better, to reassure them, to prove that they care. And beneath all of this is a quiet terror. The terror that if they stop pleasing people, if they stop managing everyone's emotions, if they stop working so hard to be liked, they'll be abandoned, they'll be rejected, they'll be alone. Because somewhere deep inside, they learned that their value comes from what they give others, not from who they are. And then there are the rejection-sensitive overthinkers. These are people whose nervous systems are wired to detect the smallest signs of abandonment, and conversations for them are minefields. Every interaction is scanned for evidence that someone is pulling away, that someone is losing interest, that someone is beginning to see them as too much or not enough. And the thing about rejection sensitivity is this: it doesn't need much evidence. A delayed text response becomes rejection. A distracted moment during conversation becomes rejection. a cancelled plan becomes rejection, and after every conversation, these overthinkers replay moments looking for the turning point. The moment when they felt the shift, the moment when the other person's energy changed, the moment when warmth became distance, and their replays are painful. Because they're not just remembering what happened, they're feeling the rejection all over again, the tightness in their chest, the sinking feeling, the confirmation of their deepest fear that they're not wanted, that they're too sensitive, that they care too much, that they're exhausting to be around. And they tell themselves stories about how the other person probably went home and complained about them, how the other person is relieved the conversation is over, how the other person is already finding ways to avoid future interactions, and these stories feel true. Because rejection-sensitive people have often experienced real rejection, real abandonment, real moments where people they cared about walked away. So their nervous system learned to be hypervigilant, to scan constantly, to protect them by finding the rejection before it fully arrives. Then there are the socially anxious overthinkers, and their pattern is slightly different. They don't just replay conversations, they catastrophize them. They take every small, awkward moment and blow it up into proof of their fundamental inadequacy. Stumbled word becomes evidence that they're inarticulate. A moment of silence becomes evidence that they're boring. A nervous laugh becomes evidence that they're weird. And after every conversation, they feel a wash of shame. Not guilt. Shame. The kind that says there's something fundamentally wrong with me. That I'm broken. That I'll never be able to do this right. That social situations will always be painful. These overthinkers often isolate after conversations. They tell themselves they need a break. They need to recover. They need to avoid putting themselves through that again. And the more they isolate, the more anxious future conversations become. Because they lose practice. They lose the casual ease that comes from regular interaction. And every conversation starts feeling like a high-stakes performance where they're bound to fail. And they replay conversations not to learn from them, but to confirm what they already believe. That they're not good at this, that other people can tell, that they'll always be on the outside looking in. And there's another type, one that people talk about less, the trauma-informed overthinker. These are people who learned early that words can be dangerous, that tone matters, that a shift in someone's voice can signal a shift in safety. Maybe they grew up in homes where they had to read the room constantly to stay safe, where they had to interpret every subtle signal to know whether they were about to be yelled at or ignored or hurt in some way. And that hypervigilance, that constant monitoring, it doesn't just turn off when childhood ends. It carries into adulthood, into every conversation, into every interaction. So when these people overthink conversations, they're not just replaying words, they're assessing threat levels. They're asking, was I safe in that moment? Did I say something that could be used against me later? Did I reveal too much? Did I let my guard down? Did I trust too quickly? And their overthinking is a form of vigilance, a way of staying one step ahead, a way of protecting themselves from surprises, from hurt, from betrayal. Because their past taught them that people are unpredictable, that safety is fragile, that trust is dangerous. And these overthinkers often feel misunderstood, because from the outside it looks like anxiety, it looks like overthinking, it looks like they're making problems where none exist. But from the inside, it feels like survival, it feels necessary, It feels like the only way to stay safe in a world that has proven itself unsafe. And after conversations, they replay not because they're worried about being liked, but because they're worried about being hurt. They're scanning for red flags, for warning signs, for evidence that they need to protect themselves, that they need to create distance, that they need to prepare for the inevitable moment when this person, like others before them, turns out to be dangerous. And here's what's important to understand. Each type of overthinker is asking a different question. The perfectionist is asking, did I do it right? The people pleaser is asking, is everyone else okay? The rejection-sensitive person is asking, are they leaving me? The socially anxious person is asking, did I prove I'm inadequate? The trauma-informed person is asking, am I safe? But underneath all these different questions is the same fundamental need. The need for certainty, the need to know where they stand, the need to feel secure in their connections, the need to trust that they won't be hurt or abandoned or rejected or exposed. And the tragedy is this: no amount of overthinking provides that certainty. You can replay a conversation 1,000 times and still not know for sure what the other person thought. You can analyze every word, every pause, every expression, and still not have definitive proof. Because other people are mysteries. Their inner worlds are hidden. Their thoughts are private. And no matter how carefully you study the evidence, you're always interpreting, always guessing, always filling in gaps with your fears and assumptions and past experiences. But the overthinking continues because the need continues. The need to feel safe, to feel accepted, to feel enough. And until that need is met internally, until something inside shifts, the mind will keep searching externally. It will keep replaying conversations. It will keep analysing interactions. It will keep looking for answers that can only be found within. And maybe you recognise yourself in one of these patterns. Maybe you see yourself clearly in the perfectionist or the people pleaser or the rejection-sensitive person. Or maybe you see pieces of yourself in all of them. Because these patterns aren't always separate, they overlap, they blend, they show up differently in different relationships. You might be a perfectionist at work and a people pleaser with family and rejection, sensitive in romantic relationships. The patterns shift depending on where you feel most vulnerable, where you have the most to lose, where your wounds are most easily touched. And here's something else. These patterns didn't form randomly. They formed for reasons, good reasons, protective reasons. The perfectionist learned that mistakes had consequences. The people pleaser learned that others' happiness mattered more than their own. The rejection-sensitive person learned that people leave. The socially anxious person learned that they were judged. The trauma-informed person learned that safety is conditional. And these learnings, these adaptations, they made sense at the time. They helped you survive, they helped you navigate difficult situations, they helped you stay safe in environments that weren't always safe. So when you overthink conversations now, you're not being irrational, you're not being dramatic, you're not making problems where none exist. You're responding to old learnings, to old wounds, to patterns that were once protective and now feel imprisoning. And understanding this, seeing this clearly, it doesn't fix the overthinking immediately, but it does something important. It creates compassion, it creates space, it allows you to see yourself not as broken, but as someone who learned to be careful, someone who learned to monitor, someone who learned that vigilance keeps you safe. And that understanding is the beginning of something new. Because when you know which pattern you fall into, when you know which questions you're really asking, when you know what you're actually searching for in those mental replays, you can start addressing the real need. Not by thinking harder, not by analysing more carefully, but by slowly, gently, beginning to build internal security, internal trust, internal knowing that you're okay even when conversations don't go perfectly, even when people might be disappointed, even when rejection is possible, even when social situations feel hard, even when past wounds get triggered. You're still okay, you're still whole, you're still worthy, and that truth, when it finally settles inside you, changes everything. And if you really want to understand why you overthink conversations, you have to go back, not just to last week or last year, but further, to the beginning, to the moments when you were first learning what conversation means, what connection costs, what safety requires, because the patterns you carry now, the hypervigilance, the constant monitoring, the replay loop, they didn't just appear one day, they were built, slowly, quietly, over years, in environments that taught your nervous system to be careful, to watch, to analyze, to search for threats in the spaces between words. And maybe this feels uncomfortable to think about. Maybe you don't like the idea that your childhood shaped you in ways you're still discovering. Maybe you tell yourself your childhood was fine. It wasn't traumatic, it wasn't abusive, your parents loved you, you had a home, you had food, you were safe, and maybe all of that is true. But here's what people often miss. You don't have to experience dramatic trauma to develop patterns of overthinking. You don't have to survive terrible things to learn that conversations require careful navigation. Sometimes the lessons come quietly, through small moments, through subtle dynamics, through the emotional atmosphere of a home that looked fine from the outside but felt unpredictable on the inside. Imagine a child growing up in a house where mood was everything, where they learned to read their parents' face before speaking, where they learned to assess the emotional temperature of a room before entering it, where they learned that the same words could be met with warmth one day and irritation the next, and there was no way to predict which it would be. So they learned to be careful, they learned to monitor, they learned to watch for signs, a shift in tone, a tightness around the eyes, a certain kind of silence, and they learned that if they could just read these signs correctly, if they could just adjust their behavior quickly enough, they might avoid the anger, or the coldness, or the withdrawal that came when they got it wrong. And this child wasn't living in fear necessarily. They weren't terrified. They were just adapting, learning the rules of their particular environment. And the rule was this: words matter, tone matters, timing matters. And if you're not paying attention, if you're not reading the room, if you're not monitoring constantly, you'll say the wrong thing and face consequences you didn't see coming. So they learned to overthink, not because they wanted to, but because overthinking kept them safe. Or maybe the dynamic was different. Maybe this was a child who grew up with a parent who criticized often, not always harshly, sometimes gently, sometimes with humor, but the message was consistent. You're doing it wrong. You're too loud. You're too quiet. You're too much. You're not enough. You talk too much. You don't share enough. You're too sensitive. You're not sensitive enough. And this child learned that being themselves was somehow problematic, that their natural way of being in the world wasn't quite right. So they started monitoring, they started adjusting, they started trying to figure out what version of themselves would be acceptable, what words would be praised, what tone would be approved, what way of speaking would finally be enough. And conversations stopped being about expression. They became about performance, about getting it right, about avoiding criticism. And after every interaction, this child would replay their words, searching for the mistakes their parent would point out, preparing for the correction, anticipating the feedback. And over time, this pattern became automatic. They no longer needed their parent to criticize them. They learned to do it themselves. They internalized that critical voice. And now, decades later, they replay conversations not because anyone is actually criticizing them, but because that internal critic is still there, still watching, still scanning for flaws. Or perhaps this child grew up in a home where emotions weren't discussed, where feelings were ignored or minimized or dismissed, where, when they tried to talk about something that mattered to them, something they felt deeply, they were met with discomfort or deflection or a quick change of subject. So they learned that their inner world wasn't interesting to others, that their feelings were too much, that they should keep things light, keep things surface level, not burden people with depth. And they learned to monitor their own emotional expression, to edit it, to make sure they weren't revealing too much, weren't making others uncomfortable, weren't being too vulnerable too quickly. And now, as adults, they overthink conversations because they're constantly assessing whether they shared too much, whether they made the other person uncomfortable with their honesty, whether they should have kept things lighter, whether they revealed parts of themselves that should have stayed hidden. And they feel this quiet shame after conversations where they were authentic, this sense that they did something wrong by being real, by showing their actual thoughts and feelings, by not performing the casual, easy, emotionally moderate version of themselves they learned was acceptable. Then there are the children who grew up with unpredictable love, where affection was conditional, where their parent was warm and available one day and distant and unavailable the next, and the child couldn't figure out why, couldn't identify the pattern, couldn't predict when they'd receive warmth and when they'd receive coldness. So they developed an anxious vigilance, a constant scanning, a desperate attempt to figure out what made the difference, what brought the love closer, what pushed it away. And they started overthinking every interaction, replaying conversations with their parent, analysing what they said, how they said it, wondering if that's what caused the withdrawal, wondering if they could have said something different that would have kept the warmth a little longer. And this pattern, this anxious monitoring of connection, it doesn't stay in childhood. It follows them into every relationship, into every friendship, into every conversation, because their nervous system learned early that connection is fragile, that people can be present one moment and gone the next, and if you're not paying careful attention, if you're not replaying and analysing and trying to understand the pattern, you'll lose people without ever knowing why. Some children learned overthinking from watching their parents. Maybe they had a parent who was anxious, who worried constantly, who ruminated, who replayed their own conversations, who came home from work and spent the evening dissecting an interaction with a colleague, who modelled that this is what you do with conversations. You think about them, you analyse them, you worry about them. And the child absorbed this, not consciously, but through observation, through osmosis. They learned that this is how you process social interaction. This is normal. This is what careful people do. And other children grew up in environments where they felt fundamentally different. Maybe they were more sensitive than their siblings, more introverted in an extroverted family, more thoughtful in a family that valued quickness. more emotional in a family that valued rationality. And they noticed this difference. They felt it. And they started monitoring themselves, trying to figure out how to fit, how to belong, how to be more like the others. And conversations became opportunities to study, to learn, to figure out how people who seemed to fit so naturally were doing it, what words they used, what tone they took, what made them seem easy when everything felt hard for this child. And beneath all of these different stories, all these different environments, there is a common thread. These children learned that being themselves, speaking naturally, existing without constant self-monitoring wasn't safe, or wasn't acceptable, or wasn't enough. And they learned to compensate, to adjust, to become hyper-aware, to develop the skill of reading others, reading rooms, reading subtle shifts in energy and tone and expression. And that skill, that sensitivity, it served them. It helped them navigate difficult dynamics. It helped them stay safe. It helped them get their needs met in environments where needs weren't always met directly. But what worked in childhood doesn't always work in adulthood. The vigilance that protected a child becomes the overthinking that exhausts an adult. The monitoring that helped them survive an unpredictable home becomes the replay loop that prevents them from resting after normal conversations. The sensitivity that allowed them to read their parents' mood becomes the anxiety that sees threat in every pause, every shift in tone, every moment of silence. And here's something important. Most people who overthink conversations don't remember the specific moments they learned to do this. They don't have clear memories of being criticized or dismissed or overwhelmed by unpredictable emotions, because often these patterns form through accumulation, through hundreds of small moments, through atmospheres more than events, through what wasn't said as much as what was said, through emotional undertones that a child felt but couldn't name, through dynamics that shaped them before they had language for what was happening. So when you try to trace the origin of your overthinking, you might not find a single moment, a single conversation, a single event. You might just find a feeling, a sense of having to be careful, of having to earn acceptance, of having to monitor yourself to stay safe. And that feeling, vague as it is enough, because your nervous system doesn't need clear memories to learn patterns. It just needs repetition. It just needs consistent signals that say be alert, be careful, pay attention, notice everything, because missing something could cost you connection, safety, love. And some people learned to overthink conversations because they experienced actual rejection, real moments of being excluded, mocked, bullied, or left out. Maybe they said something in school that other kids laughed at, and the laughter was cruel, and the memory stayed. And from that day forward, they replayed every conversation searching for the thing that would make people laugh at them again. Or maybe they were rejected by a friend group, and they never fully understood why. They just knew that one day they belonged and the next day they didn't, and their mind searched endlessly for what they said, what they did, what moment caused the shift, and they never found the answer. So they learned to replay everything, to analyze everything, just in case, just to make sure they could spot the warning signs next time, just to protect themselves from that particular pain again. Others learned overthinking through a single significant relationship, maybe a first love who criticized the way they talked, who pointed out their verbal habits, who made them feel self-conscious about things they'd never noticed before, the way they said certain words, the way they laughed, the stories they told, And after that relationship ended, they couldn't stop noticing these things, couldn't stop monitoring themselves, couldn't stop replaying conversations to check if they'd fallen into those old patterns, if they'd revealed the flaws that person pointed out. And years later, long after that relationship became a memory, the overthinking remained. Because the wound hadn't healed, the criticism had burrowed deep, and the mind kept protecting the tender place where that criticism lived. And what's particularly painful about all of this is that the people who learn to overthink conversations, who learn to monitor themselves constantly, who learn to replay and analyze and search for threats, they're often incredibly kind people, incredibly thoughtful people, people who care deeply about others, people who don't want to hurt anyone, people who genuinely want connection. But the very care that makes them beautiful is also what makes them vulnerable, because they care so much about getting it right, about not hurting people, about maintaining connection, that they can't let conversations go. They can't trust that they did okay. They can't believe that their natural way of being is acceptable. And their minds tell them stories. Stories that say, if you just monitor yourself carefully enough, if you just replay conversations thoroughly enough, if you just learn from every mistake, eventually you'll get it right. Eventually you'll master social interaction. Eventually you'll stop feeling this constant low-grade anxiety about whether you belong. But the truth is, mastery isn't the goal, and it's not actually possible, because conversations are organic, they're unpredictable, they're co-created, they involve other people with their own histories, their own wounds, their own ways of processing the world, and no amount of self-monitoring can control that. But the overthinking persists because the underlying belief persists, the belief that says, I have to be careful, I have to watch myself, I have to make sure I don't make mistakes, because mistakes mean rejection, mistakes mean abandonment, mistakes mean I'm not worthy of connection. And that belief, formed so early, reinforced so consistently, becomes the foundation on which everything else is built. And until that foundation shifts, until something deeper changes, the overthinking continues. Not because the person wants it to, not because they enjoy it, but because their mind believes it's still protecting them, still keeping them safe, still preventing the rejection they learned to fear so long ago. And maybe the saddest part is this: the child who learned to overthink conversations, who learned to monitor and adjust and replay, they didn't do anything wrong. They weren't flawed. They weren't broken. They were just trying to navigate the world they were given, trying to stay safe, trying to stay connected, trying to belong. And they developed the best strategies they could with the resources they had, and those strategies worked for a time in that context. But contexts change, and what protected a child can imprison an adult. And the journey isn't about blame. It's not about finding fault with the parents or the environment or the past. It's about understanding. It's about seeing clearly how patterns form, how protection becomes prison, how survival strategies outlive their usefulness. And once you see it, once you really understand it, something begins to soften, because you realize you weren't doing anything wrong then, and you're not doing anything wrong now. You're just carrying old protections, old fears, old beliefs, and maybe, just maybe, you don't need them anymore. And once you see where the patterns began, once you understand how you learned to be vigilant, the next question becomes this: what keeps it going? What fuels the overthinking now, in the present, when you're no longer that child navigating an unpredictable home? And the answer is simpler and more complicated than you might expect. The answer is emotion, not just any emotion, but specific ones. Fear at the foundation, shame hiding beneath the surface, perfectionism standing guard at the gate. And these emotions, they don't just accompany the overthinking, they drive it, they shape it, they determine which conversations get replayed and which ones fade naturally into memory. Because here's what happens. After a conversation ends, your mind doesn't immediately start analysing. There's a gap, a moment, and in that moment an emotion arrives. Sometimes it's subtle, a slight discomfort, a vague unease, a feeling you can't quite name, and sometimes it's stronger, a tightness in your chest, a sinking sensation, a heat rise into your face. And this emotion, whatever it is, it acts like a signal. It tells your mind something important just happened. Something that needs attention. Something that needs to be processed, understood, solved. And your mind, dutiful as always, begins its work. It starts replaying, analysing, searching for the source of the feeling, trying to make sense of why you feel this way. But here's the problem. The emotion colours everything. It becomes the lens through which you view the conversation. If you feel anxious, the replay will be anxious. If you feel ashamed, the replay will be filled with shame. If you feel afraid, every moment will look threatening. Your emotions don't just react to what happened, they reconstruct what happened. They edit the memory. They highlight certain moments and dim others. They turn ambiguous expressions into definite judgments. They transform neutral silences into evidence of disapproval, and by the time you're done replaying, you're no longer remembering the actual conversation, you're remembering your emotional interpretation of it. And the emotion that sits at the very bottom of most conversational overthinking is fear. Not the kind of fear that makes you run or scream or freeze in obvious ways, but quieter fear, social fear, the fear of being judged, the fear of being rejected, the fear of being seen and found wanting, the fear that if people really knew you, really saw you without the carefully managed presentation, they wouldn't like what they found. And this fear is so foundational, so constant, that you might not even recognize it as fear anymore. It just feels normal. It just feels like the background hum of existing in the world. And this fear makes your mind search for threats. After every conversation, it scans. Did I say something that revealed too much? Did I come across as weird? Did I sound stupid? Did I bore them? Did I offend them? Did I make them uncomfortable? And these questions aren't curiosity, they're threat detection. Your mind is searching for the moment when you became unsafe, when you became vulnerable to judgment, to rejection, to exclusion. And because your mind is primed to find threats, it usually finds them, even when they don't exist, even when the conversation was perfectly fine. Your fear creates the evidence it's looking for. Imagine you said something in a conversation and immediately felt a flash of heat in your face, a moment of embarrassment, and now, hours later, you're replaying that moment over and over. What you said, how you said it, the slight pause that followed, and in your replay, that pause feels enormous. It feels like proof that you said something foolish, that everyone noticed, that they're judging you for it. But the truth might be simpler. The pause might have been nothing. The other person might have been thinking about what you said, or they might have been distracted by something completely unrelated. Or they might not have paused at all, and your anxious mind invented the pause when it reconstructed the memory, but you can't know. And that uncertainty, that lack of definitive proof either way, It feeds the fear. It keeps the mind searching, and beneath the fear, hidden deeper, is something most people don't want to look at. Shame, not guilt. Guilt is about behavior. It says, I did something wrong. But shame is about identity. It says, I am something wrong. And shame is the emotion that turns conversational mistakes into character flaws. When you replay a conversation and feel shame, you're not just thinking about what you said. You're thinking about what your words revealed about who you are. And you're finding yourself inadequate, defective, fundamentally flawed in some way that others can see even if you try to hide it. Shame makes you replay conversations looking for the moments when your true self leaked through the performance, the moments when you weren't careful enough, when your mask slipped, when people saw the anxious, uncertain, imperfect person underneath. And shame tells you that those moments are catastrophic, that people now know, that they've seen the real you, and the real you isn't acceptable, isn't lovable, isn't worthy of connection. And this belief, quiet and painful as it is, drives the replay. Because if people saw something shameful in you, you need to know. You need to assess the damage. You need to figure out how to repair it or prevent it from happening again. And what makes shame particularly cruel is that it's often invisible. People who carry deep shame rarely talk about it. They might talk about anxiety. They might talk about overthinking. They might talk about social awkwardness. But the shame underneath stays hidden, because shame feels too vulnerable to reveal, too exposing, too much like proving the very thing you're afraid of, that you're fundamentally not okay. So the shame stays quiet, and it does its work in the shadows, making you replay conversations, making you search for evidence of your inadequacy, making you believe that everyone else is fine and you're the only one struggling, the only one who doesn't know how to do this right. And then there's perfectionism. And perfectionism in this context isn't about wanting to excel. It's about trying to become acceptable, trying to reach a standard where you're finally safe from criticism, from rejection, from shame. The perfectionist overthinker believes that there's a right way to have conversations, a perfect way, and if they can just figure out what that is, if they can just master it, then they'll be okay. Then people will like them. Then they'll belong, so they replay conversations searching for their mistakes, cataloguing their errors, comparing themselves to an imagined standard they can never quite reach, and the perfectionist's mind is exhausting, because nothing is ever good enough. Even conversations that went well get analysed for the small moments that weren't perfect, the joke that fell flat, the story that went on too long, the pause that felt awkward, the word choice that wasn't quite right. And each imperfection feels like failure, like evidence that they still haven't figured it out, that they're still not good enough, that they need to work harder, monitor more carefully, try again next time to finally get it right. And beneath the perfectionism is a belief about worth, a belief that says, my value depends on my performance. If I perform well in conversations, I'm worthy. If I perform poorly, I'm not. And this belief turns every conversation into a test, an evaluation, an opportunity to prove yourself or fail yourself. And after the conversation ends, the grading begins. The mental replay becomes a performance review, and the standards are impossibly high. Because when your worth is on the line, when your acceptability as a human being depends on how well you navigate social interactions, there's no room for error. There's no room for being human. There's no room for the natural imperfection that comes with authentic connection. And here's where the emotions start creating distortions. Your mind, when it's afraid or ashamed or striving for perfection, doesn't think clearly. It doesn't process information accurately. It falls into patterns psychologists call cognitive distortions, and these distortions shape how you remember conversations. They shape what you believe happened. They shape the stories you tell yourself about what others thought, felt, or believed. One of the most common distortions is mind reading. You replay a conversation, and you don't just remember what was said, you start interpreting what the other person was thinking. They seemed distracted. They must have been bored. They didn't laugh much. They must not have found me interesting. They looked away. They must have been uncomfortable. And you treat these interpretations as facts, as definite knowledge of what was happening in someone else's mind. But you don't actually know. You can't know. You're guessing, filling in gaps, creating a story based on your own fears and assumptions. But the story feels so real, so convincing, that you believe it completely. Another distortion is fortune telling. You replay a conversation, and you don't just stay in the past, you project into the future. They seemed annoyed. They're probably going to avoid me now. I said something awkward. They're probably telling other people about it. I came across as too intense. They're probably regretting spending time with me. And these predictions, these imagined futures, they feel inevitable. They feel like logical conclusions based on what happened. But they're not. They're just stories. Just possibilities among infinite possibilities. But your anxious mind treats them as certainties, as outcomes you need to prepare for or prevent. And there's catastrophizing, where you take a small moment, a minor misstep, and you blow it up into something enormous. You stumbled over a word. Now you believe the entire conversation was ruined. You shared a personal story. Now you believe you overshared and made everyone uncomfortable. You disagreed with someone. Now you believe you came across as argumentative and difficult. Your mind takes the small imperfection and expands it until it becomes all you can see, until it becomes the defining feature of the entire interaction. And running underneath all of these distortions is the voice of the inner critic, that internal narrator who watches everything you do and comments on it. And for people who overthink conversations, the inner critic is loud. It's harsh. It's unforgiving. It sounds like a voice, but it feels like truth. It says things like, "Why did you say that? That was so stupid. You talk too much again. You always do this. They definitely think you're weird now. You're never going to get this right. Everyone else makes conversation look easy. What's wrong with you?" And this voice, this critic, it shows up during the conversation sometimes, making you self-conscious, making you monitor every word, but it shows up loudest afterward, during the replay, and it narrates the conversation with cruelty, with judgment, with the kind of harsh assessment you would never direct at another person, but you direct it at yourself, constantly, relentlessly. And over time, you start to believe what the voice says. You start to internalize it, until it's not just a voice anymore. It's your identity. It's what you believe about yourself. And beneath all of this, beneath the fear and the shame and the perfectionism and the distortions and the critical voice, is a fundamental question about worth. Do I matter? Am I valuable? Am I acceptable as I am? And for people who overthink conversations, the answer feels uncertain, conditional, dependent on performance, dependent on saying the right things, being interesting enough, not being too much, not being too little, managing impressions, controlling outcomes, earning approval one conversation at a time. And this conditional worth is exhausting because it means you're never safe, you're never secure, you're always one conversation away from being exposed as inadequate. And sometimes people who overthink conversations experience something called imposter phenomenon. The feeling that they're pretending to be someone they're not, that they're performing a version of themselves that seems acceptable but isn't authentic, and they fear that one day in one conversation the performance will slip, the mask will fall, and people will see the truth, that they don't actually know what they're doing, that they're not as confident or put together or capable as they seem, that they're just making it up as they go. And this fear makes every conversation feel risky, because every conversation is an opportunity to be found out, to be exposed, to have people realize that you're not who you've been pretending to be. And the emotional weight of all of this is staggering. Living with constant fear that you'll be judged, carrying shame that tells you you're fundamentally flawed, holding yourself to impossible standards of perfection, battling cognitive distortions that turn normal conversations into disasters, listening to an inner critic that never rests, questioning your own worth based on how well you navigate social interactions. It's no wonder you're exhausted. It's no wonder conversations feel heavy. It's no wonder you can't just let them go and move on with your day. And here's what people often miss. The emotions aren't the enemy. They're messengers. Fear is trying to protect you from rejection. Shame is trying to help you fit in by making you aware of your perceived flaws. Perfectionism is trying to make you acceptable. The critical voice is trying to coach you toward better performance. The distortions are trying to prepare you for worst-case scenarios. And the questioning of worth is trying to motivate you to prove your value. They're all in their own misguided way trying to help, trying to keep you safe, trying to ensure you maintain connection. But the way they help, the methods they use, they create more pain than protection. They keep you trapped in your head. They prevent you from being present. They steal your peace. And they convince you that you're not okay when the truth might be that you're more okay than you've ever believed. And this brings us to something that might seem confusing at first. If overthinking conversations causes so much pain, so much exhaustion, so much distress, why does it continue? Why doesn't your mind simply stop? Why doesn't the pattern fade once you realize it's not helping? And the answer is both simple and tragic. The overthinking continues because in some strange way, it works. Not in the way you hope, not in the way that actually solves anything, but in a way that feels necessary, in a way that provides something your nervous system believes it needs. Because here's what happens. You finish a conversation, you feel uncertain, uncomfortable. That vague sense that something might have gone wrong, and your mind immediately starts replaying, analysing, searching. And this process, exhausting as it is, does something important. It gives you a feeling of control. It makes you feel like you're doing something, like you're addressing the problem, like you're not just passively accepting uncertainty, you're actively working to resolve it. And even though the working never actually resolves anything, even though you replay the same moments 100 times without finding real answers, the process itself feels productive. It feels like problem solving. It feels like you're taking care of yourself by trying to figure out what went wrong so you can prevent it next time. And your mind craves this sense of control, especially when emotions feel overwhelming, especially when uncertainty feels unbearable. The mental replay gives your mind something to do with all that anxious energy, something to focus on, something that feels purposeful. And so, even though the overthinking makes you feel worse in the long run, in the short term it provides a kind of relief. The relief of feeling like you're handling it, like you're being responsible, like you're protecting yourself by staying vigilant. But the truth is, you're not gaining control. You're creating the illusion of control. Because conversations are fundamentally uncontrollable. You can't control what other people think. You can't control how they interpret your words. You can't control their mood, their history, their filters, their assumptions. You can't reach into their minds and adjust their perceptions. You can only control yourself, what you say, how you show up. And even that control is limited because you're human, you're imperfect, you're influenced by your own emotions, your own tiredness, your own wounds. And trying to achieve perfect control over something as organic and co-created as conversation is like trying to control the weather. You can prepare for it, you can respond to it, but you can't control it. Yet the mind keeps trying. It keeps replaying. It keeps analysing. Because the alternative, accepting that you have no control, that you said what you said and now it's out of your hands, that feels too vulnerable, too frightening, too much like free falling. So you hold on to the illusion, you keep replaying, you keep searching for the answer that will give you certainty, the definitive proof that everything is fine or everything is ruined. At least then you would know, at least then the uncertainty would end. But that proof never comes, and the uncertainty remains, and the replaying continues. And here's where the cycle gets particularly insidious. The overthinking itself becomes a form of avoidance. You're avoiding the present moment by living in the past. You're avoiding the uncomfortable reality that conversations are imperfect and outcomes are uncertain. You're avoiding the deeper work of addressing the fear and shame and beliefs that drive the overthinking. And most importantly, you're avoiding future conversations, because the more you overthink, the more anxious you become about social situations, and the more anxious you become, the more you start avoiding them, declining invitations, making excuses, choosing isolation over interaction, because if you don't have conversations, you don't have to replay them. If you don't put yourself out there, you can't make mistakes. And this avoidance feels protective in the moment. It feels like self-care, like giving yourself a break, like creating space to recover from the exhausting mental replay. But what it actually does is make the anxiety worse, because avoidance teaches your nervous system that social situations are dangerous, that conversations are threats to be escaped, and the more you avoid, the more your anxiety grows. Until eventually even small interactions feel overwhelming, until the thought of having a simple conversation triggers the same mental spiraling that used to only happen after difficult interactions, and the cycle tightens. You overthink a conversation, you feel anxious, you avoid future conversations, your social skills get rusty from lack of practice. The next conversation you do have feels harder. You make more mistakes because you're out of practice. You overthink even more. You feel even more anxious. You avoid even more. And slowly, gradually, the world gets smaller. The safe zone shrinks. Until you're living in a space where conversations feel rare and precious and terrifying all at once. And throughout this cycle, your mind is looking for certainty, desperately searching for it, because uncertainty is what fuels anxiety. Not knowing what someone thought, not knowing if you made a good impression, not knowing if they'll want to see you again, not knowing if you said something that hurt them, not knowing if the relationship is okay. The not knowing is torture. And your mind believes that if it just thinks hard enough, analyzes carefully enough, reviews thoroughly enough, it will find certainty. It will know for sure, and then the anxiety will stop. But here's the paradox. The more you search for certainty, the less certain you feel, because every answer you find leads to another question. Every conclusion you reach gets questioned. You convince yourself that the conversation went fine, but then you remember one small moment and suddenly you're not sure again. You decide they weren't bothered by what you said, but then you notice they haven't texted in 2 days, and now you're reconsidering everything. You replay the conversation one more time to feel better, but this time you notice something you didn't notice before, and now you feel worse. The searching for certainty actually creates more uncertainty, because you're training your mind to doubt everything, to question everything, to never trust your initial read of a situation. And there's something else happening in this cycle, something subtle but powerful. The overthinking provides a kind of emotional insurance. It feels like if you worry enough, if you analyze enough, if you prepare for the worst enough, then maybe the worst won't happen. Or if it does happen, at least you'll be ready. You'll have seen it coming. You won't be blindsided. And this magical thinking, this belief that your worry can somehow prevent bad outcomes, it keeps the cycle going. Because stopping the worry feels dangerous. It feels like letting your guard down, like becoming vulnerable to surprise rejection or judgment or abandonment. But the truth is, worrying doesn't prevent anything. Analysing conversations after they're over doesn't change what happened. Rehearsing future conversations in your mind doesn't guarantee they'll go smoothly. And preparing for rejection doesn't make rejection hurt less if it comes. All the mental work does is keep you trapped. It keeps you in your head instead of in your life. It keeps you reviewing the past instead of being present. It keeps you anxious about the future instead of experiencing the now. And the exhaustion that comes from this cycle is real. It's not just mental tiredness, it's a deep, cellular exhaustion. Because your nervous system is constantly activated, constantly on alert, constantly scanning for threats, constantly processing information, constantly trying to solve problems that can't be solved. And unlike physical exhaustion that comes from running or working or doing something tangible, this mental exhaustion doesn't feel satisfying. It doesn't feel like you accomplished something. It just feels like you're tired for no good reason, like you spent all day thinking and have nothing to show for it except more anxiety and more questions. And over time, this exhaustion affects everything. It affects your ability to focus on work, your ability to enjoy moments of peace, your ability to be fully present with people you care about. Because even when you're not actively overthinking, even when you're doing something else, there's a background process running, a quiet replay happening in the margins, a persistent low-level anxiety about past conversations or future ones. And this background noise drains your energy. It steals your attention. It prevents you from fully relaxing, from fully resting, from fully being here. And there's another layer to the cycle. The overthinking often leads to reassurance seeking. You reach out to the person you had the conversation with. You send a text. You say something casual, but what you're really doing is testing, checking, trying to gauge whether things are okay, whether they're still interested in talking to you, whether you damaged the relationship. And if they respond warmly, you feel relief, temporary relief, but it doesn't last. Because soon your mind starts questioning their response. Were they being genuine? Were they just being polite? Did they take too long to respond? Was their message shorter than usual? And suddenly you're back in the spiral, back in the analysis, and the reassurance you sought didn't actually reassure you. It just gave you more material to overthink. And sometimes the reassurance seeking is more subtle. You bring up the conversation again in person. You make a joke about something you said. You apologise for talking too much or not being interesting enough, and you're watching their reaction, searching for confirmation that everything is fine, that they weren't bothered, that they still like you, and if they reassure you, if they tell you everything was great, you feel better for a moment. But then the doubt creeps back. Maybe they were just being nice. Maybe they didn't want to hurt your feelings. Maybe they did notice something was off, but they're too polite to say so. And the cycle continues. And here's what makes the cycle so difficult to break. Each component reinforces the others. The fear drives the overthinking. The overthinking creates more anxiety. The anxiety drives avoidance. The avoidance increases fear of future conversations. The fear drives more overthinking. Around and around, and each loop through the cycle strengthens the pattern, makes it more automatic, more ingrained. Until overthinking conversations doesn't feel like something you do, it feels like something that happens to you, like an involuntary response, like a reflex you can't control. And the mind starts to identify with the pattern. It starts to believe this is just who you are. Someone who overthinks, someone who's anxious, someone who's not good at conversations, and this identity becomes self-fulfilling. Because when you believe you're someone who overthinks, you don't question it, you don't challenge it, you just accept it as a fixed trait, as an unchangeable part of your personality. An acceptance of the pattern makes the pattern permanent. But beneath all of this, beneath the cycling and the exhaustion, and the false sense of control, and the avoidance and the reassurance seeking, there's still the original need. The need that started the whole process. The need to feel safe. The need to feel accepted. The need to belong. The need to know you're okay. And the tragedy is that the overthinking, the very mechanism your mind uses to try to meet these needs, actually prevents them from being met. Because you can't feel safe while constantly scanning for threats. You can't feel accepted while constantly doubting whether people like you. You can't feel like you belong while constantly analysing whether you fit in. You can't know you're okay while constantly searching for evidence that you're not. The overthinking creates the very insecurity it's trying to resolve. And this is the core of the cycle. The solution has become the problem. The protection has become the prison. And your mind, well-intentioned as it is, doesn't see this. It just keeps doing what it thinks is keeping you safe. It keeps replaying. It keeps analysing. It keeps searching. Not knowing that the searching itself is what's keeping you lost. And breaking this cycle doesn't happen through force. It doesn't happen by trying harder to stop overthinking, because trying to stop thinking about something just makes you think about it more. And criticising yourself for overthinking just adds another layer of anxiety, another thing to feel bad about, another way you're failing. This cycle doesn't break through willpower or self-discipline or determination. It breaks through understanding, through awareness, through seeing the cycle clearly for what it is, not a flaw in you, not a permanent condition, but a pattern, a habit, a learned response that made sense at one time but no longer serves you. And once you see it clearly, once you understand how each component feeds the others, Once you recognize the false promises the cycle makes, the promise of control, the promise of certainty, the promise of protection, something begins to shift. Not immediately, not dramatically, but slowly, gently. Because awareness creates space. Space between the emotion and the reaction. Space between the urge to replay and the actual replaying. Space where choice becomes possible. Where you can notice the pull to overthink and choose something different. Not perfectly, not every time, but sometimes. And sometimes is enough. Because every time you make a different choice, you weaken the cycle, you loosen its grip. You prove to yourself that you can survive without the constant analysis, that you can tolerate uncertainty, that you can be okay even without knowing for sure what someone thought or how a conversation was received. And that proof, small as it seems, quiet as it is, becomes the beginning of freedom. The beginning of a new pattern, a new way of relating to conversations, a new way of relating to yourself, because the cycle only continues as long as you believe you need it, as long as you believe that overthinking is protecting you, keeping you safe, preventing disaster. But once you see that it's not, once you see that it's actually keeping you trapped, exhausted, anxious, and small, the cycle begins to lose its power, and something new becomes possible. And when you look beneath the cycle, beneath the fear and the analysis and the exhaustion, there's something deeper happening. Something most people never name. Something that sits quietly at the center of all this overthinking, waiting to be understood. Because the truth is, conversational overthinking isn't really about conversations. It never was. It's about something much more fundamental, something more human. It's about identity, about who you are, about whether the person you are is acceptable in this world, whether you can be yourself and still be loved, whether your natural way of existing is enough, or whether you have to constantly adjust, modify, perform to earn your place among others. And this question, this deep, aching question of whether you're okay as you are, it's what drives the entire pattern. Every conversation becomes a test. Every interaction becomes evidence. Evidence of whether people see you and accept you, or whether they see you and find you wanting. And the overthinking is your mind's way of trying to control the outcome of that test, trying to ensure you pass, trying to make sure you remain acceptable, trying to guarantee that you won't be rejected for being who you are. But there's something underneath even this, something most people who overthink conversations carry without realizing it, a kind of grief, a quiet, persistent grief for the easy connection they see other people experience. The grief of watching people move through conversations effortlessly while you're trapped in your head. The grief of knowing that while everyone else seems to finish talking and move on with their day, you're still there, hours later, replaying and analysing and worrying. The grief of feeling fundamentally different. Of feeling like social interaction costs you more than it cost others. Of feeling like you're always working harder just to appear normal. And this grief rarely gets acknowledged. Because how do you grieve something that was never really lost? How do you mourn the easy social life you never had? How do you feel sad about missing something other people take for granted? It feels silly. It feels like complaining. It feels like being dramatic about something small. So the grief stays hidden, unspoken, and it does its work quietly, underneath everything else, making you feel separate, making you feel tired, making you wonder what it would be like to just talk to someone and let it be simple. Imagine for a moment what that would feel like, to have a conversation and then just continue with your day, to say what you said and trust that it was fine, to not need to review every word, to not need to search for hidden meanings in someone's expressions, to not need to check and recheck whether you're still acceptable. What would that feel like? And for people who overthink, this imagination is both beautiful and painful, because it reveals how much energy they spend on something most people do without thinking, how much of their life is consumed by this constant self-monitoring, how exhausting it is to be them. And there's something else hidden in the overthinking, something that might surprise you. The overthinking, painful as it is actually a form of care. Misguided care, certainly. Care that hurts more than it helps, but care nonetheless. Because when you overthink conversations, you're caring about the other person. You're caring about not hurting them, not offending them, not making them uncomfortable. You're caring about the relationship, about maintaining connection, about not losing something precious. And you're caring about yourself too, about protecting yourself from rejection, from judgment, from the pain of being seen and dismissed. The overthinking is your mind's way of trying to take care of you, of trying to keep you safe in a world that has taught you that words matter, that connection is fragile, that rejection is possible, that you have to be careful. And your mind, in its devoted, relentless way, keeps working, keeps analysing, keeps trying to figure out how to help you navigate this scary landscape of human connection. It doesn't know that its help is exhausting you. It doesn't realise that its protection is actually a prison. It's just doing what it believes is necessary. What it believes is keeping you alive, keeping you connected, keeping you from being alone. And maybe this is the hardest truth of all. The overthinking is rooted in a deep longing for belonging, a hunger for connection, a desire to be part of something, to be accepted into the human fold, to know that you have a place among others. And this longing is so powerful, so fundamental to human existence, that your mind will do anything to protect it, even if the protection itself creates distance, even if the constant monitoring prevents authentic connection, even if the fear of rejection keeps you from ever feeling truly seen. Because here's the painful paradox: you overthink conversations because you want connection, but the overthinking prevents the very connection you seek. You monitor yourself to ensure people accept you, but the monitoring creates a performed version of yourself that isn't fully real. You analyze interactions to make sure relationships are safe, but the analyzing keeps you in your head instead of in the moment with another person. You try so hard to be accepted that you never get to experience what it feels like to be accepted as you actually are. Because you're not showing who you actually are. You're showing a carefully managed version. A version you believe is safer, more palatable, more likely to be loved. And the exhaustion of maintaining this performed self is profound, because you're never off duty. You're never just being. You're always monitoring, always adjusting, always checking to make sure the performance is working, and after every conversation, you replay it to assess your performance, to see where you slipped, where the real you leaked through, where you forgot to maintain the image, and you feel fear when this happens. Fear that people saw something they weren't supposed to see, something that might make them leave. But what if the thing they saw was actually beautiful? What if the unguarded moment, the authentic expression, the real you showing through, what if that was the most connectable part of the entire conversation? What if people don't actually want the performed version? What if they want the real one? But you'll never know. because you're too busy replaying the moment with fear, too busy worrying that you reveal too much, too busy trying to figure out how to hide better next time. And beneath all of this is a question you might be afraid to ask. The question that sits at the very heart of your overthinking. Can I be myself and still be loved? Can I show up as I actually am, unedited, unmanaged, unperformed, and still be chosen? Still be wanted? Still be included? Or do I have to keep working, keep monitoring, keep perfecting, keep hiding the parts that feel too much or not enough or just different? And until you believe, truly believe, that the answer is yes, that you can be yourself and still be loved, the overthinking will continue. Because the overthinking is your attempt to earn love without risking rejection, to gain acceptance without being vulnerable, to belong without being fully known. And the grief returns here, the grief of never quite feeling like you belong. Even when you're included, even when people seem to like you, there's always this nagging sense that they like the version you're showing them, not the version you really are. And so the belonging feels conditional, temporary, like it could evaporate the moment you stop working so hard to maintain it. And this conditionality is lonely, deeply, achingly lonely, because you can be surrounded by people and still feel isolated. You can be in the middle of a conversation and still feel separate. You can be liked and still feel unseen. And maybe you've never said this out loud. Maybe you've never admitted how lonely it feels to overthink conversations, how isolating it is to be trapped in your own analysis while everyone else moves on, how exhausting it is to carry this constant self-doubt that no one else seems to carry. How much you wish you could just be easy, just be light, just be one of those people who talks without thinking too much and doesn't seem to suffer for it. And the loneliness of this, the isolation of being someone who experiences social interaction this way, it adds another layer to the grief. The grief of feeling different. The grief of feeling like you're doing life on hard mode while others are on easy mode. The grief of knowing that something most people take for granted, casual conversation, is actually a source of stress and anxiety for you. And there's another dimension to this that rarely gets discussed. Many people who overthink conversations feel a kind of split inside themselves. There's the person they are in their head, the person who has thoughts and feelings and ideas and depth. And then there's the person they are in conversations, the person who monitors and adjusts and performs. And these two versions don't always align. Sometimes they contradict. And this split creates its own kind of suffering, because you have all these thoughts and feelings inside you that you edit before speaking. You have depth you're afraid to show. You have vulnerability you're afraid to express. You have authenticity you're afraid to reveal. So you speak a modified version, a safer version. And then afterward, you replay the conversation feeling frustrated. Frustrated that you didn't say what you really meant. Frustrated that you held back. Frustrated that you let fear win again. But you also feel afraid. Because what if you had said what you really meant? What if you had shown the depth? What if you'd been fully authentic? Would they have stayed? Would they have understood? Would they have been able to hold all of you? Or would it have been too much? Would you have overwhelmed them? Would you have created distance instead of closeness? These questions haunt you, and they keep you playing small, keep you holding back, keep you performing instead of being. And here's where the overthinking reveals something beautiful, even though it feels anything but beautiful in the moment. The fact that you overthink conversations means you care deeply. It means relationships matter to you. It means connection is precious to you. It means you're not callous or indifferent or superficial. You're someone who pays attention, someone who thinks about impact, someone who considers others, someone who takes communication seriously. And these qualities, sensitivity, conscientiousness, care, they're valuable. They're needed in the world. They make you a better friend, a better partner, a better human. But they also make you vulnerable to overthinking, because the people who care most are the ones who worry most. And maybe this is the part that needs to be said more often. Your overthinking isn't evidence that something is wrong with you. It's evidence that something is right with you. You have a conscience. You have awareness. You have depth. You have emotional intelligence. You notice things. You feel things. You care about things. And yes, these qualities come with a cost. The cost is the mental replay. The cost is the anxiety. The cost is the exhaustion. But the qualities themselves aren't flaws. They're features. They're parts of you that make you who you are. And the goal isn't to eliminate them. The goal is to learn how to carry them more lightly, to honour them without letting them consume you, to appreciate them without letting them trap you. And there's something else that needs acknowledging. Many people who overthink conversations are also the people who make the best listeners, the most attentive friends, the most considerate partners, because they know what it's like to worry about being too much. So they make space for others. They know what it's like to fear judgment, so they offer acceptance. They know what it's like to feel misunderstood, so they try to understand. They know what it's like to need reassurance, so they give it freely. They've experienced the pain of feeling invisible or dismissed or minimized, so they make sure others feel seen and heard and valued. Their overthinking has given them empathy. It's given them sensitivity to others' needs. It's given them the ability to read between the lines, to notice what's not being said, to sense when someone is struggling even when they're smiling. And this matters. This is a gift, even though it often feels like a burden, even though the constant awareness is tiring, even though you sometimes wish you could just be oblivious, just miss things, just not notice so much. The truth is, your noticing makes you valuable. Your awareness makes you necessary. Your sensitivity makes you irreplaceable. The world needs people who pay attention, who care about words, who consider impact, who try to connect authentically, who think deeply about relationships. You might wish you were different, lighter, easier, less complicated, but the world needs exactly who you are. And here's the truth that might change everything if you let it. The overthinking, the replaying, the analysing, it's not who you are, it's what you do. And there's a difference, a crucial difference. Who you are is the person underneath, the person with depth and sensitivity and care, the person who longs for authentic connection, the person who's trying so hard to belong. The overthinking is just a strategy, a coping mechanism, a learned behaviour. And strategies can change. Behaviours can evolve. You're not permanently defined by this pattern. You're just someone who learned to protect yourself this way. And you can learn new ways, gentler ways that honour your sensitivity without exhausting you, ways that protect your heart without imprisoning it. And maybe what you need most isn't to stop overthinking. Maybe what you need most is to feel safe enough that overthinking stops feeling necessary, to build enough internal security that external validation matters less, to develop enough self-trust that other people's opinions don't determine your worth, to create enough self-compassion that mistakes don't feel catastrophic, to cultivate enough self-acceptance that you can show up as yourself without constant self-monitoring. Because when you feel fundamentally okay, when you trust yourself, when you accept yourself, conversations stop feeling like tests. They start feeling like opportunities. Opportunities to connect, to share, to be known, to experience the beautiful, messy, imperfect reality of human interaction. And that shift from seeing conversations as threats to seeing them as opportunities, that's the shift that changes everything. And once you see all of this clearly, once you understand the layers underneath the overthinking, something begins to shift. Not dramatically, not suddenly, not in a way that fixes everything overnight, but quietly, subtly. A shift in awareness, a shift in how you relate to your own mind, a shift in how you experience the pattern. Because awareness itself is powerful, not in a magical way, but in a very real, very human way. When you can see a pattern clearly, when you can name it, when you can understand where it comes from and what it's trying to do, you're no longer completely trapped inside it. You're no longer just the person who overthinks, you're also the person who notices their overthinking. And that noticing creates space, a small space, but space nonetheless. Imagine you're lying in bed, replaying a conversation from earlier in the day. Your mind is doing its usual work, analysing, searching, worrying. And then something happens. A moment of awareness. A tiny pause where you think, oh, I'm overthinking again. I'm in the pattern. And this recognition, simple as it seems, changes something. Because now you're not just overthinking. You're aware that you're overthinking. You're watching yourself do it. And this watching, this observing, it creates a kind of distance. Not a cold distance, not a judgmental distance, just a gentle space between you and the thoughts, between you and the pattern. And in that space, choice becomes possible. Not the choice to immediately stop overthinking. That's too much to ask, too big a leap. But smaller choices. The choice to notice without judging. The choice to observe without criticism. The choice to see the pattern with curiosity instead of frustration. The choice to ask, what am I really afraid of right now? What question is my mind trying to answer? What need am I trying to meet? And these questions, gentle as they are, shift something fundamental. Because they move you from being trapped in the pattern to being curious about the pattern. And curiosity is softer than criticism, more productive than frustration, more likely to lead somewhere helpful. And maybe at first, this awareness comes only occasionally, only after you've been overthinking for hours, only when you're exhausted and finally notice what you've been doing. But that's okay. That's how change begins, with small recognitions, with moments of seeing, with flashes of clarity that come and go. You don't need perfect awareness. You don't need to catch yourself every time. You just need to start noticing. And the more you notice, the more familiar the pattern becomes, not in the way where it consumes you, but in the way where you can spot it, where you can say, ah, there it is. That's the overthinking. That's the fear underneath. That's the old protection trying to keep me safe. And something important happens when you name it this way. When you call it what it is, a pattern, a protection, an old strategy, it loses some of its power, because it's no longer just reality, it's no longer just the truth about what happened, it's your mind doing a thing it learned to do. And you can have compassion for that. You can say, of course my mind is doing this. It's trying to help. It learned this strategy long ago. It's doing its best. And that compassion, that gentle understanding, it's the opposite of what most people do. Most people fight the overthinking. They criticize themselves for it. They get frustrated. They say, why am I doing this again? What's wrong with me? Why can't I just stop? And that criticism just adds another layer, another thing to feel bad about, another way you're failing. But what if instead of fighting, you softened? What if instead of criticizing, you got curious? What if instead of demanding that you stop, you asked why you're starting? What need is driving this? What fear is underneath? What old wound is getting touched? And when you approach it this way, with curiosity and compassion instead of frustration and force, something beautiful happens. You start to understand yourself, not in a theoretical way, but in a deep, felt way. You start to see the connections, the patterns, the reasons, and understanding creates change. Not immediate change, not dramatic transformation, but slow, steady, foundational change, the kind that lasts. And here's what this looks like in practice. You finish a conversation, you feel that familiar tug, that pull to replay, to analyze, to worry. And instead of immediately diving in, you pause. Just for a moment, you take a breath. You notice the feeling in your body, the tightness in your chest maybe, the slight queasiness in your stomach, the tension in your shoulders, and you acknowledge it. You say to yourself, I'm feeling anxious, I'm worried about something, and that acknowledgement, that naming of the feeling, it helps. Because now you're not just consumed by the anxiety, you're aware of it, you're relating to it, and you can ask, what am I worried about specifically? What do I need right now? And maybe the answer is, I need to know they're not upset with me. Or I need to know I didn't say something stupid. Or I need to know they still like me. And when you identify the specific need, you can address it more directly. You can ask yourself, is there any actual evidence that they're upset? Any real reason to believe they're judging me? Any concrete indication that something went wrong? And often, when you look honestly, the answer is no. There's no evidence. There's just a feeling, just a fear, just an old pattern getting activated. And knowing this, seeing this clearly, it doesn't make the anxiety disappear, but it does make it less overwhelming, less consuming, less believable, and sometimes you realize you do need reassurance. You do need to check in, and that's okay too. But awareness changes how you do it. Instead of sending an anxious text fishing for validation, you can be direct. You can say, I'm feeling a bit worried about our conversation earlier. Is everything okay between us? And this directness, this honesty, it's actually more likely to get you the reassurance you need. Because you're being authentic, you're being vulnerable, you're showing the real thing instead of hiding it behind casual questions or jokes. And most people appreciate that. Most people respond well to honesty. But many times you realize you don't actually need to reach out. You don't need external reassurance. What you need is internal reassurance, self-reassurance. And this is where self-compassion becomes essential. Instead of letting your mind spiral into worst-case scenarios, you offer yourself kindness. You say, even if the conversation wasn't perfect, I'm still okay. Even if they noticed I was nervous, I'm still acceptable. Even if I made a mistake, I'm still worthy of connection. And these statements, repeated gently, consistently, they start to rewire something deep. They start to challenge the old beliefs, the beliefs that say you have to be perfect to be loved, that mistakes are catastrophic, that people are constantly judging you, that you're not okay as you are. And self-compassion isn't about lying to yourself. It's not about pretending everything is fine when it's not. It's about treating yourself the way you'd treat someone you love, with kindness, with understanding, with the benefit of the doubt. If a friend came to you worried they'd said something wrong in a conversation, you wouldn't tell them they probably ruined everything. You'd say, "I'm sure it was fine." Even if it was awkward, people forget those moments. Everyone has awkward moments. It doesn't define you, and you'd mean it. You genuinely want to comfort them, to ease their worry, to help them see perspective, and you deserve that same comfort, that same kindness, that same perspective from yourself. And as you practice this, as you offer yourself compassion instead of criticism, something changes in how you experience overthinking. It becomes less heavy, less consuming, less shameful. You can catch yourself replaying a conversation, and instead of thinking, "Here I go again, what's wrong with me?" you can think, "Oh, my mind is doing that thing, it's trying to protect me, it's worried. That's okay, I can be gentle with this." And that gentleness, that lack of added self-judgment, it actually helps the overthinking resolve faster, because you're not feeding it with criticism. You're not adding fuel to the fire. You're just noticing it, allowing it, being kind to yourself while it happens. And often when you stop fighting it, when you stop judging it, it passes more quickly. And slowly, gradually, you start to build trust with yourself. Trust that you can handle conversations without endless analysis afterward. Trust that you'll survive even if you make mistakes. Trust that relationships can be resilient even when interactions aren't perfect. Trust that you don't need to know everything. That uncertainty is bearable. That you're fundamentally okay even when you don't feel okay. And this trust, this internal security, it's what eventually allows the overthinking to soften. Not because you forced it, not because you fought it, but because you stopped needing it as much, because you built something stronger underneath. And part of this process is learning your triggers, learning which types of conversations tend to activate the overthinking, which relationships feel most uncertain, which topics make you most self-conscious, which environments bring out your social anxiety. And once you know your triggers, you can prepare differently, not by avoiding them, but by going in with awareness, by knowing, okay, this conversation might activate my overthinking afterward. And that's okay. I know what that is now. I know it's a pattern. I know it's my mind trying to protect me. I can be ready for it. I can have compassion for it. I can let it happen without letting it consume me. And you start to notice other patterns too. You notice that you overthink more when you're tired, when you're stressed, when you're already feeling vulnerable. You notice that certain times of day are harder. That late night overthinking has a different quality than afternoon overthinking. You notice that overthinking increases when you haven't been taking care of yourself, when you've been isolated, when you've been pushing too hard. And these observations, these insights, they give you information. They tell you what helps and what makes it harder. And you can use this information to take better care of yourself. Maybe you realize you need to be careful about social interactions when you're exhausted. Not avoid them, but be aware. Be gentle with yourself afterward. Maybe you realize that you need connection, not isolation, after overthinking episodes. That reaching out to someone safe, someone who understands, actually helps more than hiding. Maybe you realize that moving your body, going for a walk, doing something physical, it helps shift the mental replay. It gives your mind something else to focus on. Or maybe you realize that you need to set boundaries on the overthinking, that you can say to yourself, okay, I can think about this for 15 minutes and then I'm going to do something else. Not because the thoughts are bad, but because thinking about it endlessly doesn't help, and you deserve to use your mental energy on things that nourish you. And sometimes the path to understanding involves recognizing what conversations actually deserve reflection versus which ones deserve to be let go. Because not every conversation needs analysis. Not every interaction requires deep processing. Some conversations are just small talk, just casual exchanges, just brief moments that don't carry deep meaning. And your mind doesn't need to treat every conversation as if it's a pivotal moment in your life. Most aren't. Most are just ordinary moments of human interaction, and learning to distinguish between conversations that genuinely need processing and conversations that can simply be experienced and released, that's a skill. One that develops over time, with practice, with awareness. And here's something that often surprises people on this path. As you develop more awareness, as you practice more self-compassion, as you learn to observe the pattern without being consumed by it, you don't become perfect. You don't stop overthinking entirely. But your relationship to it changes. You can be in the middle of a replay and suddenly think, wait, do I actually need to be doing this right now? And sometimes the answer is yes. Sometimes there's something genuinely worth reflecting on. A moment that matters, a misunderstanding that needs addressing, a pattern in your behavior that deserves attention, and that's valuable reflection. That's growth. That's awareness. But often the answer is no. You don't need to be doing this. This is just the old pattern running. Just the familiar groove your mind falls into. Just the habitual response to social interaction. And when you realize this, when you see it clearly, you can make a choice. You can choose to stay in the replay, or you can choose to redirect, to do something else, to be present with what's actually happening now instead of what happened hours ago. And this choice, this ability to redirect, it doesn't come from willpower. It comes from understanding, from awareness, from the gentle, patient work of getting to know yourself, of learning how your mind works, of recognizing patterns, of building new responses. And the beautiful thing is, this work isn't about becoming someone else. It's not about transforming into one of those people who doesn't overthink, who's naturally easy and light in conversations. It's about becoming more yourself, more at ease with who you are, more accepting of your sensitivity, more compassionate with your struggles, more trusting of your own okayness. Because you don't need to become someone else. You just need to learn how to be yourself more gently, more kindly, with less judgment and more understanding. And as this shift happens, as awareness grows, as compassion deepens, as understanding expands, you start to notice something. Conversations start feeling a little lighter. Not every conversation, not all at once, but here and there. A conversation happens and you move on, without replaying, without analysing, without worrying. And at first you might not even notice. But then you realise, wait, I had that conversation this morning and I haven't thought about it since. And that realisation is profound, because it means something is changing, something is shifting. The pattern is loosening its grip. Not because you forced it, not because you fought it, but because you understood it, because you were kind to it, because you stopped seeing it as an enemy and started seeing it as a protector that no longer needs to work so hard. And this is what the path to understanding looks like. Not a straight line, not a simple journey from broken to fixed, but a gradual, gentle, compassionate process of getting to know yourself, of learning your patterns, of understanding your fears, of recognizing your needs, of building internal security, of developing self-trust, of practicing self-compassion, and slowly, without forcing, without fighting, without harsh self-discipline, the overthinking begins to soften, the replays become shorter, the anxiety becomes quieter, the need for certainty becomes less urgent, and you start to experience something new, something you maybe haven't felt in a long time. Peace with yourself, peace with your conversations, peace with the beautiful, messy, imperfect reality of connecting with other humans. And after all of this understanding, after all this awareness, after all this compassion, you might expect the story to end with the overthinking disappearing completely, with you becoming someone who never replays conversations, someone who moves through social interactions with effortless ease, someone who's finally fixed, finally normal, finally like everyone else. But that's not how this works, and maybe that's actually good news, because the goal was never to eliminate your sensitivity. It was never to turn you into someone else. It was to help you live with who you are, to work with your nature instead of fighting against it, to integrate the overthinking mind instead of trying to destroy it. And what does that integration look like? What does life look like when you understand your patterns, when you practice compassion, when you've built awareness? It looks like this. You still overthink sometimes. You still replay conversations. You still feel anxious after certain interactions. But your relationship to all of it is different. You're not at war with yourself anymore. You're not constantly frustrated by your own mind. You're not ashamed of needing more processing time than others. You've made peace with the fact that this is part of how you're wired, part of how you move through the world, and that peace changes everything. Because when you stop fighting the overthinking, when you stop seeing it as evidence that something is wrong with you, you create space for something new. You create space to see that the same sensitivity that makes you overthink conversations also makes you deeply empathetic. The same awareness that has you replaying words also helps you notice when others are hurting. The same conscientiousness that keeps you analysing your impact also makes you careful with people's feelings. The same depth that traps you in your thoughts also allows you to understand complexity, nuance, the layered nature of human experience. And maybe this is what people miss when they look at overthinkers. They see the struggle, the anxiety, the exhaustion, the constant mental work, and they think, that person is suffering, that person needs to be fixed. But they don't see the gifts that come with that same wiring. They don't see that overthinkers are often the people who remember what you said 3 months ago, who notice when you're quieter than usual, who check in when others forget, who think deeply about relationships, who care profoundly about connection, who bring emotional intelligence and sensitivity and thoughtfulness to every interaction. These aren't separate from the overthinking, they're connected to it. They come from the same source. The same nervous system that makes you hypervigilant also makes you highly attuned. The same mind that replays conversations also processes relationships with depth and care. And when you understand this, when you see that the overthinking and the gifts are intertwined, you stop trying to eliminate yourself. You stop trying to become someone fundamentally different. You start asking a better question. Not, how do I stop overthinking? But how do I carry this sensitivity more lightly? How do I honour my depth without letting it exhaust me? How do I use my awareness without letting it trap me? And the answer to those questions is gentler than you might expect. It's acceptance. Not resignation, not giving up, not deciding you'll just suffer forever, but genuine acceptance. The kind that says, this is how my mind works, and that's okay. I can be someone who thinks deeply about conversations and still be okay. I can be someone who needs processing time and still be whole. I can be someone who feels things intensely and still be worthy of love and belonging. This acceptance doesn't mean you stop growing. It doesn't mean you stop practicing awareness or self-compassion or gentle redirection. It means you stop waiting to be someone else before you can be happy. You stop putting your life on hold until you fix this thing about yourself. You start living now, as you are, with the mind you have. And something beautiful happens when you make this shift. When you move from fighting to accepting, from fixing to integrating, from shame to understanding, you start noticing that your overthinking doesn't define you. It's something you experience, something you do, but it's not who you are. Who you are is the person underneath, the person with depth and sensitivity and care, the person who loves deeply, who thinks carefully, who feels fully, who shows up with intention, and that person, that real you, has always been enough. The overthinking was just trying to make sure you stayed safe enough to keep being you, and when you understand this, when you really feel it, conversations start to feel different. Not all of them, not every time, but more often than before. You have an interaction, and instead of immediately spiraling into analysis, you pause, you check in with yourself, you ask, do I need to process this, or can I let it be? And sometimes you need to process. Sometimes there's something genuinely worth thinking about, a pattern you noticed, a feeling that came up, a moment that matters, and you give yourself permission to think about it, without judgment, without shame, just thoughtful reflection, the kind that leads somewhere, the kind that brings insight, but other times you realize you don't need to process. The conversation was just a conversation. Nothing went wrong, nothing needs fixing, and you can let it go. Not perfectly, not without a whisper of the old urge to replay. But you can notice the urge and choose something else. Choose to trust that it was fine. Choose to believe that you're okay. Choose to be present with what's happening now instead of what happened earlier. And each time you make this choice, each time you practice letting go, it gets a little easier. The pattern loosens, the grip weakens, the overthinking loses power, and you start to trust yourself in new ways. You start to trust that you can handle imperfect conversations, that you can survive awkward moments, that you can make mistakes and relationships will endure, that people are more forgiving than your anxiety tells you, that most people aren't analysing your words the way you analyse theirs. That connection is more resilient than you believed, and this trust, built slowly through experience, through practice, through gentle experiments with letting go, it becomes your foundation, your internal security, the thing that allows you to move through conversations with less fear and more presence. And here's what surprises people on this journey. The more you accept your overthinking, the less you overthink. It's paradoxical, counterintuitive, but true. Because when you stop fighting it, when you stop adding layers of shame and frustration and self-criticism, the overthinking doesn't need to work as hard. It can relax, it can soften, it can trust that you're taking care of yourself in other ways, that you're building security, that you're practicing awareness, that you don't need the constant mental surveillance anymore because you've developed other tools, better tools, kinder tools. And you start to notice the moments of ease, the conversations that feel light, the interactions that flow naturally. the times when you're fully present instead of half in your head. And these moments, small as they are, they're evidence. Evidence that something is changing, that you're changing, not into someone else, but into a more settled version of yourself, a version that trusts more, worries less, accepts more, fights less, lives more, analyzes less. And people around you might start to notice too. They might say you seem different, more relaxed, more present, more yourself, and they're right. Because when you stop fighting your sensitivity, when you stop trying to be someone you're not, you become more available, more authentic, more connected. You're not spending all your energy managing impressions and monitoring yourself and replaying interactions. You're actually there, in the conversation, in the moment, in the relationship. And people feel that. They respond to it. Connection deepens, not because you perfected your social skills, but because you stopped performing and started being, and you realize something else. The people who matter, the people who are worth keeping in your life, they never needed you to be perfect. They never needed you to say exactly the right thing every time. They never needed you to be effortlessly charming or endlessly interesting or completely without awkwardness. They just needed you to be real, to show up, to care, to try. And you've always done that. You've always cared. You've always tried. The overthinking was just proof of how much you cared, how much you wanted to get it right, how much connection mattered to you. And now you can care without suffering quite so much. You can try without exhausting yourself. You can want connection without being terrified of losing it, because you've built something inside yourself that can't be taken away. A sense of okayness that doesn't depend on perfect performances. A knowing that you're acceptable even when you're not perfect. A trust that you deserve love even when you make mistakes. And this internal foundation, solid and sure, it changes how you move through the world. You become someone who can have a difficult conversation and not replay it for days. Someone who can be vulnerable without spiraling into shame afterward. Someone who can disagree with someone without panicking about whether they still like you. Someone who can be quiet in a group without convincing yourself you were boring. Someone who can be excited and animated without worrying you were too much. Someone who can be yourself in all your complexity, in all your imperfection, in all your beautiful, messy humanity, and trust that it's enough. And the overthinking doesn't disappear, but it becomes quieter, gentler, less frequent, less consuming. It becomes something that happens sometimes instead of something that defines you. It becomes a pattern you recognize instead of a prison you live in. It becomes a signal that something needs attention instead of evidence that something is wrong with you. And when it does show up, when you find yourself in the familiar spiral, you can meet it with kindness. You can say, oh, there you are. I know what this is. I know why you're here. You're trying to help, and I appreciate that. But I'm okay. I can handle this. I don't need to figure everything out right now. And slowly, through this practice, through this gentle, patient, compassionate relationship with your own mind, you discover something you maybe didn't believe was possible. You discover that you can be someone who overthinks conversations and still live a full life, a connected life, a joyful life. You can be sensitive and strong, thoughtful and spontaneous, careful and courageous. You can carry depth without being crushed by it. You can feel intensely without being overwhelmed by it. You can think deeply without being trapped by it. And you realize that all those years of fighting yourself, of trying to be different, of wishing you were more like other people, you were missing something important. You were missing the beauty in your own way of being, the gifts in your sensitivity, the value in your depth, the strength in your care. You were so focused on the cost, the exhaustion, the anxiety, that you couldn't see the other side, the empathy, the awareness, the emotional intelligence, the capacity for deep connection, the ability to understand complexity, the gift of feeling and noticing and caring so much. And when you finally see yourself clearly, when you see the whole picture, not just the struggle but also the strengths, not just the pain but also the gifts, not just the overthinking but also the depth that creates it, something settles inside you, a quiet acceptance, a gentle pride, not arrogance, not superiority, just a soft appreciation for who you are, for how you're made, for the particular way you move through the world. And you understand that you don't need to change fundamentally. You just needed to stop being at war with yourself. You needed to stop seeing your sensitivity as a flaw and start seeing it as a feature that comes with costs, yes, but also with profound gifts. And now, finally, you can carry both. The costs and the gifts, the challenges and the strengths, the overthinking and the depth. You can hold all of it with compassion, with understanding, with acceptance. And life becomes lighter, not because you stopped feeling deeply, but because you stopped drowning in shame about it. Not because conversations became easy, but because you stopped expecting them to be perfect. Not because you stopped overthinking entirely, but because you stopped letting it define you. You became bigger than the pattern, wider than the worry, more expansive than the fear. You became someone who can hold complexity, who can be both sensitive and resilient, who can overthink conversations and still know, deep down, that you're fundamentally okay. And maybe that's the real transformation. Not becoming someone who never overthinks, but becoming someone who overthinks sometimes and doesn't fall apart because of it. Someone who can have the thought spiral and also have perspective. Someone who can feel the anxiety and also feel their own steadiness underneath. Someone who can experience the pattern and also remember that it's just a pattern, not the truth about who they are or how their life has to be. And you carry this new understanding forward into every conversation, into every relationship, into every moment of uncertainty. You carry the knowing that you're okay, that your sensitivity is a gift, even when it feels like a burden, that your depth is valuable, even when it feels heavy, that you belong exactly as you are, overthinking mind and all. And that belonging, that deep sense of being acceptable, being enough, being worthy of connection just as you are, that's what you were searching for all along, and you finally found it. Not out there in perfect conversations or flawless performances, but in here, in yourself, in the quiet acceptance of your own beautiful, complicated, overthinking, deeply feeling, profoundly caring heart. And now, as these words settle, as this understanding finds its place somewhere inside you, there's nothing left you need to figure out, nothing you need to solve tonight. Not about conversations, not about yourself, not about anything at all. You can let your thoughts drift, let them soften, let them fade into the quiet spaces between breaths. You don't need to remember everything you heard. You don't need to analyze this moment. You don't need to replay anything. Your mind can rest now. It's been working so hard for so long, and tonight it can simply be still. You are enough, right now, in this moment, with all your sensitivity, with all your depth, with all your beautiful, overthinking, deeply feeling heart. You are enough. You have always been enough. And if thoughts come, Let them pass like clouds, soft, gentle, drifting. You don't need to hold them. You don't need to chase them. They can simply move through while you rest here, safe, quiet, held by this moment. Let your body soften. Let your mind settle. Let everything you've been carrying gently release. There's nothing you need to do, nowhere you need to be, nothing you need to prove. Just this breath, just this quiet, just this gentle letting go. Rest now. You're okay.